All I want to ask you is, did you get your greens today? I got mine. One, two. Peace and Black Power family. You know what this is. Black News 102. Brother Sarnetta on the mic. And of course, we got our brother Jabari and my brother Dr. Reggie. And what we're going to do right here is sharpen each other's sword right quick. You know, to prepare ourselves for the real world when we in these streets, because everybody always run up on us when we outside, Reggie. You know that. They try to challenge us. So, I mean, this is Kemet versus Kemet right now. Kemet versus Kemet right now, man. Wow, that's what's up. So the first thing I'll have for you, my brother Jabari, I'm not going to be asking questions. I'm going to just let y'all two brothers have y'all dialogue. Okay. And what I want to first ask you is, how or who initiated you in the craft? And how did that work? What was the ceremony like? Who initiated you?
I'm going to do this one really quickly because it can be a long story. I don't want to make it a long story. But let me say to you that it was in 1990 when I was a freshman at Cornell that I finally realized I had been interested in history for a long time. I had been studying history. But when I got to Cornell, I began to realize that history was not the sum total. That what I should be really doing is attempting to find a way to actually live the history, if that makes sense. And so it was in 1990, probably around November or so, that I actually realized that I was no longer Christian. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was absolutely stunned, scared, all of that. And in my further research, I began to realize that there were people who were practitioners. And this is particularly the Somerset Society in the beginning. And so at the same time, you should know, I was still working with Dr. Ben, working with Dr. Clark. We were bringing them back up to Cornell University. They had retired at the time when I got there. And I maintained a relationship with them so that they can continue to teach me. So at the same time, I go down back to New York City to a Somerset. I started studying at a Somerset for a number of years. And it really, when I graduated from Cornell in 1994, that was when I really started working with the Somerset very frequently. I was there several times a week. I took several classes, more classes. I continued to do lots of research and study. And it wasn't until 1998 that I actually realized that my spiritual house was not going to be a Soraset, that it was actually going to be the Shrine of Ptah, led by the man that some of you know as Baba Heru. His full name is Heru Ankh Rasamad Se Ptah. He is the holder of the Shrine of Ptah. He has been practicing Kemetic spirituality for as long as anyone else in the West, if not longer than anyone else in the West. And it was at that time that I sat with him, and in many ways at that point what I had done is I had read a whole lot, right? So I had tons of information, but I had no way to organize it. I had no way to understand it. And so he sat with this young Kemite and helped me understand the tradition. And it was at that time that I also began to recognize, because here I am, a trained person. I had an Africana Studies degree from Cornell University. I had studied with Dr. Ben. I had studied with Dr. Clark. I'd studied with others who had sharpened my understanding of ancient Africa. Some people think that I'm just a Kemetic scholar, but my degree is not in ancient Kemet. My degree focuses on ancient Africa. And so I have studied most of the major traditions in Africa. I studied with people like Donna Huadike and Dr. James Turner and some of the folks that you'll even see mentioned in my book as well. And so that's what I did. It was Baba Heru that really, though, served as my guide. And I want to say something very carefully here. And this is perhaps one of the things that people don't always understand. When you have a spiritual guide, it's more than just to understand material culture. It's more than just to read, right? Baba Heru, since 1998 to now, has been I call him my spiritual father. He's a person that's there when I'm struggling. He's a person that's there when I celebrate. He's a person that challenges me when I've done something that needs challenging. He's a person that celebrates me when I've done amazing things. And so he is more than just the person that I talk history with, even though I will say to you, some of you don't know this, Baba Heru is well read as anyone that I know. And I'm going to tell you that I've met with people who had doctorates in Africana Studies. I still have relationships with people who have practiced and studied ancient African history for decades. And I'm going to tell you that Baba Heru is as well read as anyone I know. Sometimes if you see him walking, you might think that he's just a priest. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. So he is extremely well read, but he's also a practitioner. And that's really what I think the process is. And for those of you who are wondering what the final granting of my Ankh was like, people who are asking that haven't done much research on me. The very ceremony is online. The very ceremony is on YouTube. Look for my Ankh ceremony. That's when I received my Ankh in 2010. And you should know that in my tradition, those people who carry a carrying Ankh are part of the priesthood. They are men and women, brothers and sisters, who have dedicated their lives not just to understanding the ways of ancient Kemet, but also to serving the people. My title is Hemneter Entepi. That means the servant of the divine, the chief servant of the divine, because I'm the chief priest now of the Shrine of Ma'at. And so understand that means that I am not here to sit on a throne and to have people deify me and have people worship me. That's not what the tradition means. It means that I am a servant of the people. And I'll tell you, and I had this conversation with Sanetta a few times, you know, walking in the street, because wherever I go, I have to have my Ankh. Right? Wherever I go. And you should know that priests of the Kemetic tradition today, we don't live in a monastery. I live in the hood. I live in Harlem. I work in the secular world. And so carrying this can be a real challenge. But the only time that people who I don't know ask me to help them is when I'm rushing to a meeting. I don't know. That's just how the divine works, how the inter works, that I have to be reminded of my ultimate responsibility. I'm rushing to a meeting and someone says, I see your uncle, you a priest? And I go, uh-oh. And then they say, I'm going through a lot, brother. Can you pray with me? And I am obligated to assist them. I am obligated to assist them. And so that is what my tradition is.
All right, Brother Jabari, before we get in this discussion, one more thing, man, because this is very important too. You held up a book the last time, not that I was here, the last time we did a show, we did a debate with you and Michael Edwards, and you held up a book, The Jesus Mysteries. Okay? was the origins of Jesus, a pagan god. You held up this book, and now the people are coming at you. Well, they said you are pseudo for holding up a pseudo book. I don't know if you could get out of this one, brother, but I'm going to give you the mic. I want to see if you can get out of this, because now they're trying to put you in the category as a young space boy, the space boy. But yeah.
Let me say this to you. Just yesterday, you made me aware of a video that was made saying that I've been exposed for using pseudo scholarship. And I'm going to tell you that whoever made that video, I want to sit with them, because that person is a tactician. That person recognized if they said certain things, it would cause ripples in the community. So I really appreciate that tactically they did something that was going to have to be responded to. So whoever made that video, you and I need to sit and debate, because I appreciate the craft behind debating, the craft behind setting landmines for people to walk into. So that was fun. Now let me say to you, family, if you watch that video, you should know that there's something wrong right off the bat. Because they told me that, they said that I've been exposed for using pseudo scholarship, and all they dealt with was the cover. If that's not the definition of faulty scholarship, I don't know what is. I don't tend to use the word pseudo because I think it's just a cheap phrase that lay people use. But if that's not pseudo, what is pseudo? So instead of actually dealing with the information in the book, they actually simply talked about the cover of the book. This is a really, really dastardly strategy that people have been using for a long time. That's the reason why when you look for one of the divine sacred books in ancient Kemet, what do you see on the cover? It's called the Book of the Dead. It's called the Book of the Dead. Now, why do they call it the Book of the Dead? The only people that are going to read the Book of the Dead are people who are reading it for historical purposes, because they want to know what happened in ancient Kemet. But people would be scared away by the title of this book. By the way, this book was not called the Book of the Dead, right? So sometimes when you deal with just a cover, you don't actually deal with the information in a book. Now, let me be really clear. I actually know the author of the book. If you looked, folks are not doing research on me. On the book known as the Jesus Mysteries. I know the author. So folks are not doing enough research. If you really want to step in and try to really make me struggle, at least do some more research on me. You will see that I did an interview with him on my television show, Kemetic Legacy Today. And so I hope you don't think that I use this book because I didn't know what I was doing. I use this book precisely because I knew what I was doing. So I want you to understand something very, very clearly here. The reason why this book is important is because it draws the tradition of ancient Kemet into the center of the Abrahamic traditions that are more prevalent today. It allows us to understand that the traditions of Kemet gave birth to those traditions that we would call Judaism today, those traditions that we would call Christianity today, and those traditions that we would call Islam today. And there are other Abrahamic traditions like the Baha'i faith and others like that. But that's what that book does. Now, are there other books? There are a multitude of books. There are a multitude of books that do this. And I cited some others in that debate. The fundamental concept in this book is one that I stand by. The early Christian church is one that was not as rudimentary as some adherents to Christianity would like to believe. They don't know anything about the origins of the Christian church. They only read the Bible. That's like reading a book and not knowing anything about the author, anything about how something was done, anything about why the book was put together, none of it. And people usually read the Bible almost like they think that it was one text and it was always one text. Sometimes you'll see people read one section and say, if you want to understand it better, come to this section. And all of a sudden they act like they're unlocking a code. What they have to understand, and brothers and sisters, or those of you who are doing this at home have to understand, that some of those books were never meant to be put together. That there were a multiplicity of books used by early Christians. And many of those books actually have still yet to be discovered. That there was a period when powerful Europeans, yes, Europeans, I know that some of you who are in the Christian tradition don't want to hear this. Powerful Europeans primarily decided they would make their tradition literal. They decided they would make their tradition patriarchal. They decided that they would create a tradition where they could put themselves at the top of the tradition and everyone else would follow. This is where we get the concept that the Pope is fallible. This is where we get the concept that women need to follow their husband. This is where we get the concept that the priest is, in some ways, a representation of Jesus the Christ. They made things very literal. Some of the books that were not included are not, either they speak to the role of women, and I challenge your audience to look at a book on a woman named Thecla. I also challenge you to look at the book of Enoch. Now, some of us have read the book of Enoch now, right? They say, well, this is about an African. I should read it. I applaud you for doing that. But if you read the book of Enoch, you'll notice that they're not talking about things that happen literally. They must be talking about spiritual symbolism. That's the reason why a book like that could not be included in the canonical Bible. And there's something else that you have to recognize. Now, one of the authors, the person that put up the video on this book, I love how they do this. They actually mentioned Bart Ehrman, and they hoped that the family would not be familiar with Bart Ehrman. They assume that you would think that they're mentioning scholars that think that my scholarship is pseudo. First of all, understand those scholars have never heard of Jabari Osaze. I have inhabited an area where I'm working with my people to build something. I'm not simply a historian for history's sake, so I'm not in their circles. But you better understand that if you mention Bart Ehrman, you're going to have a bigger challenge than this book. What is one of Bart Ehrman's major books? It's a book called Forged. He makes the argument that many of the books of the Bible have been what? Forged. They didn't think that you were going to do any research on their video. Really, really slick. So if you think that this book is difficult and you don't want to deal with it, just wait till you read his stuff. And he's a guy that has a PhD, that lectures, that teaches at the university level, was a Christian, is now sort of agnostic. So you had better understand that while all arguments have weaknesses, right? All arguments have weaknesses. Is it possible that the image on the cover of the Jesus Mysteries was a weakness of the book? Maybe. But I'm going to tell you, if you read the book, you'll see that the image has very little to do with their main theses of the book. The main theses is that Christianity developed out of the traditions that were brought to us by the deity that you know of as Osiris or Asar, and those traditions that were actually brought forth based on Asar, that went into the Mediterranean world, were reinterpreted according to the cultures of mostly those Tamhu people, the European people. And then what they did was they also influenced Christianity. So in many ways, Christianity is influenced by Kemet twice. And that's the reason why you see so many things in the Kemetic tradition that are actually in the Christian tradition. Let me say this one thing. When I talk to people about the Kemetic tradition and the Christian tradition, sometimes people say, oh, they sound very similar. And I have to say to them, yes, they sound similar, because you are now being acquainted to the root that the tree comes out of. And so that's the challenge that I give you. So the person that made that video, you and I need to debate. I see your game, family, and I appreciate that you did that, because it was a nice tactical ploy. But the reality is they have opened up even more literature that is not something that those people that want to use it, your brother is pseudo. Oh yeah, well, if that person thinks I'm pseudo, then look at the stuff that they were mentioning. Then you're going to even notice even more that the tradition that you're looking at is extremely literal, and it wasn't always literal. You're going to see that the tradition that you're part of is extremely patriarchal, and it wasn't always patriarchal. Because then you'll be acquainted with the people that actually built the tradition. Those people are not mentioned in the Bible.
Okay, moving right along to my brother Reggie. Before we get started, I would like for Reggie, Dr. Reggie, I call him, to give some type of background for those who may just be getting acquainted with our brother, not knowing that he's been here for years. He came up through the ranks. He sat at the feet of Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Amos Wilson, Francis Cress Wells, and you name it. He's been through the ranks. So I would like for my brother Reggie to give some background to show the people that he is qualified, or even more qualified, to sit next to Jabari and have this discussion with our brother Jabari.
Peace, Black family. This is your brother Reggie, and I'm happy to be here at the Center for the Restoration of Ma'at again with my brother Jabari. Peace. And the family, and with Black News 102.
Who's the big brother, who the little brother?
Sarnetta. I am 52 years old,
okay.
So that makes me older. Yeah. He's older.
Big brother.
That's right.
He was short of elder, but it was okay. It was fine. My background. I went to City College of New York starting in 1982. There about 1983, 84, it could have been 82, that I took my first Black Studies class. And but I didn't take Dr. Leonard Jeffries' class to 1984. I took a class. I think Dr. Jeffries was in South Africa in 83. Right, and I think I took a class in 82. They told me about Dr. Jeffries. 83, 84, I needed another class. So I ended up taking Dr. Leonard Jeffries' Black Rose Seminary, which was an advanced course in Black Studies. And I had taken maybe 1 or 2 Black Studies courses before. When I met Dr. Leonard Jeffries, he asked me what qualifies me to be able to take his advanced course. And, you know, Dr. Jeffries has an enormous heart. He gave me an opportunity, but he asked me a couple of questions. The questions were simply, you know, why do you think you'll do well in this class? And he asked me, do I know George Washington? I said yes. He asked me, do I know Abraham Lincoln? I said of course. He asked me some things about both of them just to get to know me. And after that he says, well, how do you think you're doing in my class? And I said, well, you know, I know about Lord Dunmore and the Ethiopian regiments. I know about the Emancipation Proclamation. I even know about Frederick Douglass. I know about the Civil War, the Gettysburg. I know a lot about the Civil War. I know a lot about the Declaration of Independence and the Independence fight. He said, how do you think you're doing? I said, I'm doing at least a B, you know, B plus. He says, no, you're getting so far you're an F. I said, why? I said, why am I an F? He says, because you're like everybody else. You come into my class, an advanced class, you don't know who I am, right? And you're going to take my class, and you don't understand that the way you have to pass this class is you have to know your own ancestors at the time, at least of Abraham Lincoln. If you can't honor your own family, you're not going to be successful in my class. So for me and everyone else, we had to go to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. We had to call our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers. The first paper we had to write was our own families, because Dr. Jeffrey says he can't talk about history unless he's talking about your own family, because you're not going to connect to history unless you're not involved of it. Anyway, from that point on, I was pretty much under his wing. And that helped me a lot moving out of the concept of my projects, which was Castle Hill Projects. Anybody knows Castle Hill Projects, y'all know what it is, right? And I was in the early 80s when the transformation from powder cocaine was getting ready to hit to rock cocaine, but I was in the middle of powder cocaine, and I was a soldier in my community. My little brothers are sex, money, and murder. Those are my little brothers. I'm not going to name their names. My little brothers and the snitches I grew up with, right? So I grew up right there. They my little brothers, and I have always been their big brother. And we still talk to this day, right? So that's my pedigree. That's my street pedigree. But I moved all of that out as Dr. Jeffries first introduced me to the Shanties as the Tunfor Pakawari II came to New York City for a Grand Durbar. And that is where I volunteered to help support the Durbar. That's actually when I really actually met Professor Small, James Small, because he was in charge of the whole field and the event. And then I worked with him. And then by 1986, quickly I was in Ghana with Dr. John Henry Clark. In 1986, his first trip back to Africa in many, many years. I went with Brother William Randolph X, who became a teacher of mine, because William Randolph X was in Dr. Ben's craft. He became a teacher of mine. And then I, in 1980s, 86, we also had the ASCAC Eastern Region Conference. And that is where the greats, Dr. Jacob Carruthers came, and Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Malana Karenga, and I had worked with them on 85 in building up for this conference in 86. In 87 now, I'm on my way with 1,000 people to Kemet.
Woo, 1,000?
1,000, and I ended up being an officer in ASCAC and ended up taking about 120, 130 on my trip. And you heard it many times, Dr. Jeffries verified it. I was a group leader for 120 to 130 Africans going to the Nile Valley for a 10-day tour. Through this whole period, I got an intimate knowledge of ancient Kemet, of working with Dr. Ben, listening to him lecture, sitting at his feet, along with Dr. Jeffries. Also, I think the next year after that, I learned the Metanetra. When I went to Kemet, I didn't know the Metanetra. But then I soon learned, but I knew the cosmology, I knew, and I was a young man. And you can see me in many of the Dr. Ben videos at City College. Blacks in Science, you will see me at the end. And you will also see me later sitting with Dr. Riketti Amen, who I learned a lot from. And you will see me with many of the greats. So I knew them all, personally. Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Jacob Carruthers, the people from the Kemetic Institute of Chicago. We was all one, certainly the First World Alliance. That is where Dr. Ben did most of his teachings with everyone else, and that's where I became a student. So now, I say all of this to lay a background. I have been an officer in ASCAC. I have been a young scholar in ASCAC. I have been a student of Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark and others, and Dr. John Henry Clark was worth his salt in ancient Egypt, in ancient Kemet. Many people do not know. You could consider Dr. John Henry Clark a generalist, but he had expertise, and one of his expertise was ancient Kemet, believe it or not. So he could take Dr. Ben to task on many things, and one of the things Dr. John Henry Clark was particularly interested in was the destruction of black civilization. He wrote, I think, a foreword to the Arab invasion of Egypt. He was interested in Nubia. He was interested in the Bach Treaty. And that's one of his research projects that moved over to me, looking for the Arab role in the slave trade. And I found, after his death, unfortunately, an aspect of the Bach Treaty. I had become a researcher during that time. I ended up working at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, in technology, but also helping them with research tools. So I kind of cut my teeth, and then I came back and then was always a supporter and a friend of Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark and Dr. Leonard Jeffries and others. Now, through this, I have been an officer of ASCAC, in charge of the largest study group that ASCAC ever had, which was the Eastern Region group, which had over 600-700 participants studying various aspects of Nile Valley culture. And I was the first vice president of the Eastern Region. I was in charge of that process. And it was a very, very successful process. And it helped ASCAC build many of his conferences after that, and the concept of the study group. Now, So I've been able to be around the greats, listen to the greats, and that ain't even included sitting at Dr. Theophilo Banger's feet, listening to him lecture. I have sought them out for the knowledge. So I'm going to end on my personal kind of biography, and then we could talk about some of the differences and similarities that we have. Is that fair? Okay. And I've seen a lot of people very, very interested in the subject and the teachings of Nile Valley culture. And I have seen many of these people enter wanting to know secrets, wanting to know knowledge, wanting to know spirituality, wanting to know things about ancient Egypt or ancient Kemet from a curious point of view, meaning wanting to be a student of some of the greats. And I've seen many aspects of this. I have seen the craft of Hunefer, that is Dr. Yosef Ben Jochanan's, the craft that he created, the craft of Hunefer. I have seen the craft of Amun-Ra from a distance, that is the craft that Dr. Asra Kwesi has created. I've seen or read some of the works of Dr. Muta Ashby. I have come in contact and went to several of the events of the Asar Aset community from Ra-Un-Nefer. I have, Amen. I have met, of course, along very early, Baba Heru Samaj. I met him very early along the time period of ASCAC with Dr. Yosef Ben Jochanan. I've certainly the Kemetic Institute of Chicago. I've met them as they practice with Dr. Jacob Carruthers. Dr. Malana Karenga is not religious, but I've met him in his work. And then many of these people now, in the young people in the conscious community, and of course I have from a distance seen Dr. York and their practice, right, of the Nubians. I have seen that, right? So I've seen many different elements. What I am concerned with, and you know he has the camera on your face, so what I am concerned with is that many of our people go into these systems and become religiousized. And the problem is when they become religiousized, right? They become religiousized. They don't have the tools for further study, and they look for guides and teachers. And then me knowing the many guides and teachers over the years, I have been critical. Now, also, I want to add Brother Infidisi Jehudimas, right? Or I could say Dr. Infidisi Jehudimas, and certainly Dr. Riketi Amen, right? I have seen also their practice. I think Dr. Riketi Amen, of all the people I've ever encountered, she has the most stable and consistent and beautiful practice of Nile Valley culture in her teachings and her life. That's Dr. Riketi Amen. And I've met Brother Infidisi Jehudimas and many of his students, right? And so sometimes you tell a person by their students, like I'm telling the teachings of Brother Samaj from you and your wife. But I've also seen many disasters. And I've seen many cultish kind of activities. And this is what I am here to have a conversation with, because one of the things I want to do today is we know that you are a great historian, and we know that you are a priest. People are very curious about what your system is. Now, so when I turn the mic over to you after you begin to talk, what I want for both of us to do is to unpack Nile Valley, our Nile Valley systems. Because people don't know. See, if you go to some of these other things, their leaders and their guides are actually divine. They're actually divine. They're up there with the Netaru, right? And that's unacceptable to me. That's acceptable to the people who follow. That's not necessarily acceptable to my people because I don't know who their teachers are.
So, Brother Reggie, I want to ask you a question. I'm going to let you answer because I know you don't like people to go too long. You want to answer point by point. But what I want to ask Reggie is, what is your definition of religious pertaining to the Kemetic science? What do you mean when you say people are religious?
Okay. One is that they leave their own faculties outside the door, meaning they trust their guide, and they trust the knowledge of their guide first. Now, that's a big problem with me, right? That's a big problem. And when they do that, they're no better than the Christians, the Muslims, the Moors, the Hebrews, the Buddhists, any of those groups of people. Actually, the Buddhists are better. Any of those groups of people, because now they trust either a book or a guide. And so the guide now has control over their life, sometimes their families, sometimes their money, and that the people are not like you, Brother Jabari. They're very defensive, they're very arrogant, they tell you what books to read, but they don't know any of this. So
they tell you what books to read?
No, they tell you what books. No, they tell you the books of their teachers.
Oh, I see. Oh, you're saying the books that their teachers wrote.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Without saying them, but they know who I am. There are several books and works of these teachers, and that is their holy books. And Dr. Yosef Benjo Cannon fought against creating these holy books with certain people in charge.
So now, are you accusing Brother Jabari of being one of these people who have become religious, brother?
No, I'm very open-minded with Brother Jabari and the Center for the Restoration of Ma'at because it sounds right. I'm interested a little bit on the Shrine of Ma'at, but I have known this family for many years, and they have shown good qualities. Now, and I've known their teacher for many years, right? I am not so critical with him, but people need to know what Brother Reggie believes, or what Brother Reggie practices, and my concepts, and the people need to know what are the other concepts and the other practices. And then that's why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about, because and I'll come back to this, I believe that the practice of science and mathematics and communications will lead, right, an African practice of those things will lead to spirituality. I don't believe that rituals in itself are helpful to our people. I do not believe that rituals in itself will help people. Chants, any of that stuff, prayers, any of that stuff, because I think that the Nile Valley African knew much, much more about science, quantum physics, mathematics, the understanding of time and the universe. And I also wanted, since I brought up time, certainly Dr. Richetti is an expert on the calendar, and then there is also Patah Seeker, who is controversial, but he does deal with time. Our systems are scientific, not religious, and that's why I was talking to Captain Tazariak on that day, was basically like, what tools do you have to give people? Like your laws and statutes and commandments don't beget science and technology. So I see our practice as scientific, and I'll get a little bit more to that, but at some point you give me 8 minutes, you give Brother Jabari 8 minutes, and let us unpack our systems so that people can know what the similarities and differences are.
Well, let me say to you that much of what Reggie said I agree with. I actually believe that when people get to a point where they are no longer doing personal development, They're no longer doing personal study. They're no longer even challenging the things that they know against the things that they begin to realize are the highest teachings, that you do get into a situation where your traditions become cultish. Now, let me say to you, in the almost 30 years that I've been in the Kemetic community, I have not seen many groups that are in that mold. I have not. I have seen some. Let me say that. I have seen some. I do believe that, to be very clear with you, and this is where we differ, I believe that when you describe the Kemetic tradition and you describe it as if it's science, as if it's math, one of the things that I heard Brother Reggie say on Saturday that I disagreed with, and it wasn't a well, let me just say what I heard. I heard him say that when he thinks about these spiritual traditions, we're describing science, and he said that he does not pray to these deities. And so I want to be clear that I do pray to the deities. But I don't see the distinction between science and spirituality and math as clearly as you do, perhaps. And I think that those distinctions didn't exist as readily in the ancient world. And I think that the European mind tends to be very analytical and oppositional, so that they see black and white, when the African mind tends to see more relations. And so I look at some of our greatest scientific texts. If you look at, for example, the book that has been misnomered, the Edwin Smith Papyrus today. The Edwin Smith Papyrus is probably one of the world's earliest and greatest medical texts. But when it was first discovered by the European, when they first become aware of it, they translated a little bit of it. By the way, Edmund Smith could not translate it. But he translated a little bit of it, and they later noticed that there were prayers there. And so they said, this is fetish. And they didn't go any further. So they didn't recognize that the African mind is much more relational, that we didn't necessarily see a great distinction between prayer and science. We understood that they both had to occur, that you had to recognize that the divine force was all things and in all things, and that when you focused on the divine, you were able to cultivate a particular type of energy. But they also recognized there were things that you could do in the physical world that could also affect the physical world. And so they did both of those things. And so I think that when we describe the spiritual traditions of Kemet as simply science or simply math, I think that we are only getting half of the story. And if we're going to be reconstructionists, if we're going to take some of our best examples as people who are from this tradition, we have to understand them. We can't just simply look at them the way that the European would. And I think that would be a challenge. Now, let me say something else to you. A spiritual tradition, and I think you would agree with this, but let's see if the way I describe it, you would agree completely. A spiritual tradition should help you figure out what to do when you fall down. A spiritual tradition should help you understand what is your fundamental essence in the universe. A spiritual tradition should help you clarify how you should behave to others, what kind of relationship you should have with your significant other, what kind of relationship you should have with people who are weaker, who are stronger. And I think that if you look at Kemet's body, the absolutely extensive body of literature, some of the first things we wrote about were social interaction and how to become divine, how to live according to principles and laws that were in tune with the divine. I would say that's a spiritual tradition. And so, let's speak very specifically now. I mean, I'm a chief priest now, which means that I actually run a shrine. I actually have people who are under my tutelage in some way, where I'm trying to bring them into the Kemetic tradition. Do we do chanting? Yes. Do we do prayer? Absolutely. Do we do worship? Yes. But we also talk about, well, what do you do? How do you know what you're doing is the right thing to do?
Let me ask you.
How do you figure out?
I gotta ask him. Let me ask you.
Yes.
Do they do chanting in ancient Kemet? Were they chanting? And if so, can you prove that?
That's actually a very easy thing to prove. And Reggie knows this. Listen, I'm going to tell you something about Reggie and I. We have been debating for the better part of 15 years. And Anika would stand there, my queen, would stand there and look at us. And she would see that on the stuff we agree upon, we say, yeah. And we would just talk about stuff we disagreed on. Because to some degree, we enjoy debating each other, right? Some of this is politer than it usually is, family, because people are looking at us. When the two of us are just together, we used to go at it. One time he disagreed with me so much, he came and slipped something under my door and say, this is why you're wrong. We were not anywhere near my house. We were at least 7 or 8 blocks away. So I'm going to tell you that we enjoy doing that. It's not because I don't respect him. I actually, and people will accuse me of doing this, blame me for doing this, say I'm wrong for doing this, but this is who I am. I actually believe one of the reasons why I argue with Reggie about this is because I respect his knowledge of the tradition. I'm pleased that he gave his pedigree. I'm familiar with much of his pedigree because I've seen him for a long time and we've talked about a lot of it. This is a brother that has a lot of knowledge on what our ancestors did. I would never question him on that. I think that it would be helpful to have more people who are familiar with the traditions and the history and the language in the tradition of people who are practicing. Because there are people that practice and don't know much about the history. And in the shrine of Ma'at, and listen, my initiates will tell you this. They were with me for 14 weeks, actually 15 weeks, but 14 weeks, 3 hours a week. They had things to do when they were not here, and much of what they did was history. Because I believe that if we're going to try to recreate something, even spiritually, we have to know what it is. I think that's what Reggie has bristled against in the past. Because there's some people who say, this is what we do, and it's not based on anything. That's not who I am. Now, I think that there are 3 guides to knowing whether there's something you should do in practice or not in the Kemetic tradition. One, is it something that we can tell our ancestors felt was important and did in terms of their spiritual uplift? 2, is it inspired and consistent with what they did? In other words, one of the things that my teacher, my spiritual father, Baba Heru Ankara Samaj Se Patah, brought into existence was a ritual called the opening of the way. The opening of the way, according to the way it's described, is not something you will see on the walls, but you'll see all of the principles. So that what happens is when you see the opening of the way, you recognize that it is simply a retelling of something that is completely and entirely defined by ancient principles. He didn't just make it up. He didn't just make up some words. He didn't just say this is why we do it and this is why we do it. And the third thing that you have to do is, the other thing we have to do is, we have to say, does this practice assist us with something that is truly a problem in our society right now? So those are the 3 things I would say we need to do in order to move forward.
I don't believe in the mythology. I don't believe in any of the mythology of Nile Valley culture. None of the mythology. Wow. I believe they're all teaching stories to talk about science. Every single one of them. But none of them, for example, if we go and we talk about Ma'at, if we go and talk about Aset, we talk about Usir, we talk about Nebhed, we talk about Nut. All of these things are actually talking about the universe, particles, gravity, strong forces, weak forces, dark matter, dark energy, evolution, the creation of stars, the creation of time, and evolution and how we fit in it. And these are all teaching stories. The myths become teaching stories so that this information spreads because it's very, very, very technical. I believe, for example, in the Paradigm Heru, I believe that that is a story of energy conservation. It is not a story of simply just the afterlife, but it's a symbol of what happens. It's a system of what happens to particles, what happens to atoms, how is energy moved, the weighing, the differences of these quantum particles, looking for the purest of the quantum particle. What were you sent here for? And do you become a star? Is the energy that you created in yourself, your system, does that become something else, or does that become recycled by Amit? I believe in none of those stories, and I believe that you don't have to believe in those stories to be an African, to be a Nile Valley African, to be my Keru, to be true voice. I believe that what happens is that people come in and people usurp these scientific principles for themselves, and so that's why in this we're going to get to a part where we can unpack science or religion. And I think that they can be together to a certain extent, but then religion fails the African. And that the science is the thing that catapults us. I'm not dealing with Captain Tazariak and Hebrews, and they have come a long way. And I respect them, and Sarnetta likes to have this ongoing dialogue because people are Christian and people are Hebrew, and he's using it as a teacher story just to show if they're evolving, and they are evolving. They're a little softer to us because before they tell you in a minute, suck a Geb dick. In a minute, right? They have changed.
We in the shrine, brother.
But this is what they say. I'm telling the truth of the insults to African people. So we can't be in a shrine and not understand war. And we can't understand why Kemet was defeated.
So let me ask you another question, Brother Reggie. I'm gonna let you go. I know you want to go. To understand you a little deeper, Reggie, and what you're talking about is, are you saying Ma'at, you don't believe in the signs of Ma'at? Because when you say you don't believe Ma'at being real in terms of truth, justice, righteousness, reciprocity, balance, harmony, and order, what the ancient Kemetic people brought to us, you don't believe that is real, brother? Help me understand.
I can best express Ma'at with science, right? And use the metaphor of a woman with a feather in her hair, because Ma'at is a concept of a field. It's a scientific field of how the universe operates. And then there's something called chaos, and chaos could be East-Fed, it could be a PEP. So there's a system, and then but Ma'at is a balancing force of the universe that makes positive and negative things work. And we do something very beautiful in Nile Valley culture. We make it a woman. We make our highest principles women. Highest principle in science, Seshet is a woman. Highest principle in resurrection is a Set and her sister Nebhed, right? Highest principle in the balancing of these forces that we live in, like gravity, and is Nut, right? So we use women as our highest qualities, but for scientific reasons, but we make them allegories. And so that's the difference between, we have similarities, because in his sense, he can practice the religion and it can come out the same. I'm saying the true form is to practice the science, right? And to understand that these are teaching stories to raise our people higher than just the stories. And we're going to get into the reasons. We're going to get into the reasons why I am correct, and I think that many of the practitioners are wrong. And then I'm going to be hard, and I'm going to be strong, and I don't know, me and you, Brother Jabari, might walk out of here, but the rest of them ain't going to walk out, because they're, okay, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop, because at some point we want to break down our systems, and I think that we should do that for the people.
All right.
Well, let me say to you that I think the distinction that Brother Reggie is making is one that I don't see as clearly. When he says he doesn't believe in the mythos, but he believes they're teaching tools, then that means you believe in the mythos.
No.
Because understand that when I talk about the story of Asar, by the way, I do not believe that a person a human person was actually murdered and cut up into 14 pieces and put back together, and I don't make that argument. I don't make the argument that this was a human being. I think that that's the literalism that people in the Abrahamic tradition come to it with, and they don't even. That's the reason why Brother Tazaria could not understand our answer. Now, I do think, because these are spiritual stories, and I said this on Saturday. For those of you who are looking at this and did not see the debate on Saturday, I always say that what we're describing is the difference between history and myth. And history is something that happened once, that one person did at one time, and can actually never actually occur the same exact way ever again. And myth is that which is always occurring. Myth is that which we should all be emulating. Myth is that which we should all be attempting to do. And so some of that myth has to do with how to behave within other individuals. It's hard to call that science. In some ways, you might be able to call it a code of ethics. In some ways, it has to do with understanding what is truly important. But to say I don't believe in a myth means that in order for me to say that, I would have to actually believe that there's a woman out there, an African woman with a feather on her head. And what I'm saying to you is that is spiritual symbolism. And so in some ways we're saying the same thing, but I think that when you try to describe it as science, you take some of the spirituality out of it. Ritual is done because it reminds us of what is important. Ritual is not done for the sake of ritual. Ritual done for the sake of ritual is fetish. Ritual is done for the sake of recognizing that which is important. When you go into a courtroom and everyone stands when the judge comes in, the reason why they stand is because they're trying to say that this person is learned, is fair enough, that we should respect what they say. Now, unfortunately, in the United States, we shouldn't even be standing for more than half of those people that come into the room. We should not even be asked to stand. But that is why we do that. So in some ways, standing in the courtroom is a ritual, because it's trying to remind us what is important. And so I do ritual to remind me of what's important. When I do the opening of the way, for example, the opening of the way reminds me that I am a divine being, that I am imbued with all of the powers and the rights and responsibilities of the universe, that I am the universe. And if you look at it that way, you do not approach your life in a disempowered manner. So many times when people are struggling, it's because they're disempowered. And the highest teaching of any spiritual tradition is how to empower people, how them to recognize what they're capable of because of their fundamental nature. Now, you might call that quantum physics, and I wouldn't disagree with you that quantum physics is beginning to describe some of this. But I think that the spiritual traditions describe them in a way, in my opinion, that are higher. So when I do my prayer, for example, before I debate, I'm not going to tell you exactly which ones. Before I debate, before I engage in any discussion, in my mind, I am going through invoking those indwelling divine forces. By the way, this is a fundamental thing I need to say. The Kemetic tradition believes that these deities, I don't even like to use the word gods, so family, stick with me for a second. I'm going to use it and then take it away, just because most people aren't going to be familiar with what I'm saying if I don't use it. Many of these gods is that they are also indwelling faculties. And that's the reason why when someone goes and has their heart weighed and then they are finally seen as someone who is Makeru, their name is then Asar and your name. So if it was Jabari that was found Makeru, it would be Jabari Asar, because the divine force is also you. So that when I do ritual, the opening of the way, for example, that was brought to us by Heru Ankara Samad Sepata, based entirely on ancient principles that our Kemetic ancestors brought forward, what I am doing is reminding myself that I am a divine force and that I have control of my environment. If I do that, I approach the world very differently. And ultimately, if your spiritual tradition is not assisting you with developing better character, which is not assisting you with developing better accountability, is not assisting you with developing better relationships, is not assisting you with understanding what you have to do, then it's not something that you should possibly do.
One quick question that I have to ask, right?
Sure.
So, I hear you as a practitioner, and you're my brother and friend, right? Somebody I respect.
Right.
You're not putting all of what happens in Nile Valley to you, are you? Because some people actually believe differently than you, as far as does these neters actually exist. Some people actually believe that that Asar actually lived on the planet. You may not conceive that they do, but there are Nile Valley Africans, and this is who Captain Tazariak is attacking. He doesn't know the difference between the thinking. So the way you expressed it is way different than some of the Nile Valley Africans who actually believe that Asar, Aset, walked the earth, that Asar was cut into the 14 pieces, his penis was swallowed by the catfish, and etc., etc. They actually, and so that's why he's attacking us. And now you're saying you don't necessarily believe that they were humans or that they were actually living beings.
He's saying we know they wasn't human.
Yeah, I'm not even saying I don't necessarily believe. But hear me. I'm not saying I don't necessarily believe they're humans. I'm saying they absolutely were not human. I'm not even equivocating on this. I'm not. But here's the deal. But let me say this to you. I have been in the Kemetic community for nearly 30 years. I've had interaction with many people in many different shrines, in many different lineages. We haven't talked about lineage yet. Who actually believe many things. It is very rare for me to find a practitioner of Kemetic spirituality that believes that those divine forces are physical beings. That is very rare. Now, and let me say to you that understand that most of us are coming from the Abrahamic traditions. And so sometimes what has to happen is we have to get to a point where we get past our transition, where we're not simply just changing the names. We have to get past the point where the things that we were taught in those traditions, we recognize that some of them are not from the highest teaching and that there are higher teachings. And let me also say this to you. I think that if you go to any tradition, you will find people that are not practicing the highest tradition. And part of that is also because some of those people who are practicing are not connected to institutions. Some of those people who are practicing are studying only on their own. Some of those people who are doing all those things don't have the ability to be learned. And I think even if you went into ancient Kemet and you spoke to some dude who was simply a farmer, that guy might say some things that the practitioners would say are different. So that everybody in their traditions actually comes to a point where there are some people who are exposing the higher traditions and there are others that are not. And I think that you should also understand that this takes work. Some of what I'm describing to you, and the way that we clarify it is stuff that I'm not even supposed to share with you. Share with anyone just in an open setting. Because some of this is revelatory. That is what initiation is. Initiation is a process where the greater teachings become revealed. They come from inside of you. They're not just what I'm telling you. It becomes clear based on how you practice.
So this is when, and brother, I respect you.
Sure.
Right?
I know
this is when
you can disagree with me.
This is when
understand your respect.
This is when it gets spooky.
Okay.
Because now you're taking an authority that you can speak for a number of people, right?
What number of people?
Of the tradition, right? And what you're doing is you're putting all under what you say when I know for a fact, and I just can't name them just because of out of respect and they're not here, but these people actually believe that the netters exist.
But
that they exist, that they. But let me.
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out why you're disagreeing, because you're covering for something that actually happens.
Let me say to you that, first of all, I said to you that it is very rare.
Okay.
So I'm not saying to you that I have not met anyone that said Asar is a human person.
Okay.
I'm not saying I've never seen that. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that I have met literally tens of thousands of practitioners, maybe more, over the course of my interaction in several different houses. I'm also telling you that I'm not just a practitioner. Wait, let me say this. I'm not just a practitioner, but I'm a high priest, which means that there are people that are under my care.
You're personalizing
and so,
yourself. And
no, I'm not. I am not personalizing it to... No.
First of all,
that's not true. Wait, I'm not finished yet. That's not true. I'm not personalizing to myself. I'm saying to you that I am someone who runs a shrine, and I have interaction with many people.
When you say I, you're personalizing to yourself.
Brother, I'm talking about my understanding. We're both talking about our understandings. But what I'm saying to you, you're not hearing what I'm saying. What I'm saying to you, I'm talking to you about my experience as someone who has been a practitioner for 30 years. I'm not just talking about the way I see the view. See, I can only see the world through these two eyes.
I am expanding the argument to why the other people are attacking you.
No.
The things that they're saying.
I do not believe that's why the other folks are attacking us. The other people are attacking us because when they hear our description, they don't accept our description because their tradition is literal. That's why. Okay. And so they'll say, I believe that Moses existed. I believe that Joshua existed. And in the United States. As a practitioner, I have access to and have had relationships with many of them. And I'm telling you that it is extremely rare for someone to make that argument.
Okay. So when I say Inezerek Mat, Anuk Mat, what am I saying? What am I saying?
You are saying, actually, that is really a phrase that would be used in ceremony. And I'm glad you said it. Because I say Anejarak, right? We're just putting different vowels in. And essentially, almost what we're saying is Ma'at, show me your face. Become clear to me, I am Ma'at. And so that's exactly what I'm talking about. That these divine forces are not just outside of us, but they're inside of us. And if they're inside of us, if I am a Sar, then I have to know that everyone is a Sar. In fact, I would even argue with you that that's one of the reasons why in the Kemetic tradition, Heru has the U sound on the end. Because generally in the Kemetic language, the U sound is a sound that sounds plural. And I think what they were trying to say is that we're all Heru, not just one of us. And so I think that this is the highest teaching. As someone who has been a practitioner for a long time, I think that there are I could tell you 8 or 9 ways off the top of my head that the Kemetic people made that same argument.
Okay, so sometimes I am a very stickler when it comes to text.
Sure.
And and now, so we're getting to a point. The opening of the way ceremony. You say that your teacher taught you the opening of the way ceremony, or that he was your guide to that, right? Mm-hmm. I want you to unpack what that is. Unpack it from Nile Valley and unpack it just for 4 or 5 minutes. Just unpack the opening of the way, because I'm gonna come back. So I'm just gonna let you know. So unpack it and so I need to know. Just unpack it. Just unpack it, good brother.
But is there something particular you want to know? I want to make sure I'm answering your question.
Brother, teach it to the people.
Okay.
Teach
Okay.
it to your people in 4 minutes.
Perhaps this is the best way to describe it. And you know, one of the reasons why we're here is also because I have all of the teaching tools, as Reggie would call them. I agree with that term. I really do. I think that it's powerful because sometimes you can show them things physically that help them understand concepts that are harder to see. So as you look at this is sort of a replica. It's not really a replica. It's a model of what the jars that would have held the organs of our ancestors in the Hapi Nile Valley would have used. Right? And inside of this, you'll actually see these vessels. These are smaller, obviously, model versions of what we usually call, sometimes you hear them called canopic jars. Canopus was a Greek deity, so I don't use that term. But I want you to be, I'm using it now because that's the only way people are going to be able to find it and do their additional research. And so basically what our ancestors did is they put their organs in these vessels because in some ways these interu, had dominion over those portions of their body. In some ways, their body was the divine, right? And so when you look, I'm not going to show you this one, I'm going to show you the larger ones. So when I start, I'll start with this one for a very specific purpose. When I do the opening of the way, we face a particular direction. It's a direction that these were sat in, these were actually placed in, because these deities were also connected to a cardinal point, right? And so you know who this one is. This one is Hapi, right? The baboon. And so when I start my opening of the way that was taught to me by my spiritual father, I clearly say, Nedrak in Bethet. Now you might say, well, this is not in Bethet, this is Hapi. But actually, if you look further, you will see that when our ancestors described Hapi, he was always depicted, he was always being depicted as being defended by a particular Ntert, a particular divine female consort. And that one is in Bethet. Sometimes you'll hear Nebtehet, right? So we say that name, we say his name, we give power to them, and we move on, right? So essentially, we're saying the names of all of the divine forces that are connected to our organs and also connected to the cardinal points, because we are recognizing that we are divine vessels. That is the ceremony, right? Now, that ceremony in the format of it was something that was developed by my spiritual father, right? But it is completely and entirely based on ancient principle. So in that way, I would say it falls in some ways in the second category of practice that I described. So I don't follow anything that I don't think follows in those three things. I'm not going to just create something because I think it sounds cool. I'm not going to just do something because I think it looks cool. I'm not going to say something because I think this is what people like to hear. I believe that in terms of the way that practice in ancient Kemet occurs, we have to get to a point where we are able to live the tradition. Our ancestors believed that we should live the tradition. And so that's what I do. Now, I think that one of the things that Reggie bristles at is some people who don't have enough information to live the tradition. And I lovingly critique them, because I recognize that when I realized that I was no longer Christian in 1990 and that my tradition was now one that came from ancient Kemet, I was that guy that was just reading everything and didn't always understand the higher teaching. I had to actually sit with an elder and do my own teaching. If you listen to Baba Heru, he will say that I know as much information possibly as he does now. That's not who he was when I met him. So that's not who I was when I met him. He forced me to continue to read. He didn't say, do this because I'm telling you to do it. He would challenge me to read, because that's who he is. And I know that that's not necessarily been your experience with him, because he's someone that you know, but he was never someone that you worked with in practice. But that's who he is to me. He's the kind of person that believes that the legacy has to live, but it has to be based on what our ancestors did.
Okay. So here's my issue. Right. First of all, the opener of the way has a name, right? So it's Wep Wawet.
Yes.
Wep Wawet is the opener of the way. Mm-hmm. Wep Wawet is a wolf.
Wep Wawet is the opener of the way.
That's correct. And Wep Wawet is a wolf.
He's a jackal.
Well, he's a wolf animal. He's a wolf type animal.
Let's be specific. He's a jackal.
Here's the thing, because what happens is they begin to separate him and Inpu. So they begin to separate.
And Inpu was a jackal, right, not a wolf.
But I'm just trying to say.
Okay.
So he is described a little bit differently. So he's in that family, right? Now, the Wep Wawet has several different functions in several different places. Mm-hmm. Some it is funerary. Mm-hmm. Some it has something to do with kingship. It has something to do with burial. It has something to do with warfare. It has something to do with the path, because this Wep is the horns and Wat is a path. Right? So it has something to do with the path of humanity.
Yes.
Now, My problem is when a person takes something like that and creates a ceremony called wet while wet, right? Or based on the opening of the way,
Right.
then I was just waiting for you to describe it, because our opponents are just not, we have opponents. Our opponents are not just the religious people, but our opponents are also, believe it or not, the Europeans. And the Europeans are heavily tooled in this warfare, right? And anyone who is a lower practitioner or have a lower understanding would be embarrassed on the floor of any academic debate, right? But the religious person will take what you may have been taught, right, and not expand on it and fail us in the intellectual warfare. That's what I'm saying, brother. That's what I'm not talking about you, because I respect your scholarship.
Right.
But I am talking about the lower, the initiates and the others who are observing.
But Reggie, but wait, let me say this.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. I really do, and I appreciate what you're saying. But here's the deal: people who are learned, people who are in traditions. And let's even make it academic for a moment. People who are actually in any field of study. There are some people who have learned more, and there's some people who have learned less.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you that I know that. Here's a good example. When I sat at the feet of Dr. John Henry Clark many years ago, I'm talking about as an 18-year-old, as a 19-year-old, he would literally speak sometimes for 5 or 6 hours at a time. And what would I do? I would sit there at his feet and I would just write notes. When I look at my notes now, guess what? They don't make a darn bit of sense. Reggie, I didn't know enough then to be able to understand all that he was talking about. So there will always be people who know a little bit less. My responsibility to those people as a chief priest is to assist them to move through the gates, to assist them, because the ritual, because you have to understand that, let me explain, listen, you have to understand that the ritual is not just so they can go to academic warfare. The ritual is supposed to help them in the way that they proceed in their day. And so if you understand, by the way, I'm going to tell you that if you just look at what we do every other Sunday and we describe the opening of the way, everything that I said to you, I say. So anyone, but you have to understand what I'm saying to you. No. Anyone that does anything, there will be some people who understand it in its fullest meaning and some people who will not. That's just the way that that humanity works.
Take it from a text, or was it made up?
It's both.
Okay.
Some of it is clearly taken from text, and the format is taken, the principles are taken, and it is created according to those principles. Let me say this to you. There is nothing in that ceremony that cannot be justified according to the ancient tradition. Nothing. And so that is why I use this one as a point for us to contend. Because I want you to understand that I don't just sit here chanting words that are mumbo jumbo. By the way, I hate using the word mumbo jumbo. I can't even believe I used it. I don't just sit here and chant things that don't make any sense. I don't do that. And it's my responsibility as a spiritual leader to not just tend to my... this is not just about education, Brother Reggie. If someone is going to court and I do the opening of the way with them, they feel differently when they enter the court. If someone is in school and they're struggling, when I do the opening of the way with them, they approach their studies differently. It's not just about understanding ancient Kemet. Our spiritual traditions should help us be our best selves. And so that is why I teach it. Now, I'm going to tell you that there's some people that I have taught it that don't understand all of it. They're still learning, just as I am still learning. I also don't want the audience to get the impression that Jabari Osaze Heru Jeremiah Aten Ra is not a work in progress. The priest, the highest priest of ancient Kemet, would have been studying for up to 42 years. And I'm only 45 years old. So I also don't want you to give you the impression, family at home, that I am the ultimate authority. We are all learning and growing.
Just a quick question. This is just a quick question, and you can just answer it, and then I have a chance. So, what's the difference between that in the blood of Jesus Christ? Or what's the difference between that with a Hebrew chant or a Moor chant? Islam. What is the difference between Assalamu Alaikum or Allahu Akbar? It gives the people the same feelings, right? Based on what they chant, they get the same thing. It's just your version of what you teach. What I'm trying to get to is what actually are the teachings, and can we get the teachings without the ritual? Because all the other groups, when the Hebrews, I mean Sanetta, I don't know where your fringes are today, but Sanetta is a Hebrew. He know those chants. He stand right up there, and we know them. What is the difference? Why is ours special? Because they all got those chants and they all got those rituals, right? What happens in the Holy Ghost church, they feel better about facing the enemy with that. And the Hebrews, man, they feel real strong. They come out 8-10. They not like us. They come out as an army.
There's certain things that you do in order to purify yourself. There's a certain way you think. I don't know how you could call that all science. Does science explain to you how you should behave with your wife?
Yes.
What science is that?
Science of sex.
Come on, man. He's saying that the relationship with his wife is just a sexual relationship.
No, but it's all encompassing.
Brother Reggie, no. If you listen, all I'm going to say to you is this. I didn't even go into what I teach as much, and I wish I could. We're short on time. I wish I could. I hope you understand the principles by which I go into what I teach. I hope you understand that. My initiates go through, every week we have a different topic. We call them the Sebketiyu, the gates. Yes. And you go through the gates each time. They build on each other. And at the end, you should have a fundamental understanding of Kemetic history, some of Kemetic language, because we do teach some Kemetic language even in our initial initiation, and even how to purify oneself, how to do altar work, how to think of, how to focus on divine energy so that you can be your highest self. That is what spirituality is. And that is truly what I attempt to do.
Well, we'll talk again.
We have to.
And we'll talk again. It's a pleasure talking to you in your beautiful home, in your beautiful space. And we have another conversation.
Listen, I really enjoyed talking to Reggie, so I'm pleased that we got a chance to talk about some of this. We don't agree on everything, family. We don't. And we're gonna argue vehemently behind this. But the difference between some of the people that you've seen on this network and me is that I'm a practitioner. And so we're going to not always agree on everything. But I'm going to tell you something very clearly. We certainly agree on the place and position of Kemet in the historical world.
That we do.
We agree with that 129%, if I can do a non-scientific equation. So that those people who are sitting here and thinking that they're going to find space between us, if you're talking about history, we're going to beat you up together all day long.
Yeah, this is internal.
So come to that. That's right.
Differences.
That's right.
And I respect that.
Yes.
Say that again? Yeah, it's an internal conversation about internal differences, but I respect you.
And I respect you too, deeply. You know I respect you. Listen, we have respected each other for many years, and so I want to thank Brother Sanetta for once again allowing us to engage in this conversation, because you have to ask yourself, family, where else or when else have you seen this dialogue? The only time you see this dialogue is when you're sitting with people who have been studying for a long time. Some people have not had access to people who have been doing that. This is important. And that's why you have to support the work that he's doing. Some of y'all in different camps don't necessarily like all that Sanetta does. But you better recognize that this kind of dialogue doesn't happen anywhere else. And so you better support Black News 102. You better support Brother Sanetta, because the reality is our community has to discuss these important issues in order to be powerful.
We got the real black news. Y'all got the fake news. Tune into Black News 102, Sanetta TV. Black power.
And I'm going to say, Shemim Matep, go forth in peace. Because you know, I'm going to be in Kemet from the 1st to the 10th. I'm not going to miss the Unity, our Unity conference on the 13th. I'm not going to miss it. And so you better believe it's important, and you better be there too. Peace.
On August 13th, 2017, all roads lead to the reunion.
I love it. This is what's happening. It's the House of Consciousness reunion celebration coming August the 13th.
Hey man, this your Captain Tazaria Kavai should be and the Commander General Hunter, man. August 13th at the Alhambra Ballroom right here in Harlem, man. They're having a conscious community reunion. A lot of brothers gonna come in the building. I'll be in the building as well. A lot of sisters going to be in the building, man. It's going to be a great event. Brothers coming from all across the country, all across the world to this event. So y'all should come out there, man, because we're going to present actual solutions. Now, I can't speak for everybody else.
Reunion celebration, August 13th, 2017. Unity.
That's why I want to call this the family reunion. We got everybody coming down August 13th, 2017.
The House of Consciousness reunion celebration, August 13, 2017.
August the 13th, I want you to be in the house.
Come on out, August 13th, the House of Consciousness family reunion.
If you're not in New York, August 13th at the Alhambra, right?
Yep.
For the HOK reunion, you are not where it's at. It's
August 13th, the HOK reunion, House of Consciousness reunion.
Have your ass in the building. This is going to be powerful. And you know what I'm coming to do. I'm coming to bring that work. I see you there.
Be in the building August 13th, House of Consciousness United.
I'm not just invited, I'm confirmed. I'm going to be there on August 13th.
August 13th. Well, it's going to be live.
August 13th, it is going down, family. It is a long overdue, but yet critically right on time event that we're having.
August 13th, 2017 at the Alhambra Ballroom.
Yeah, August 13th, I'll be in the building.